Dad, do you want to maybe just help us define exactly what spirituality is in our context?
Okay, well, look, the way I would tend to think about it is spirituality relates to a soul dimension in life. So it relates to transcendent experience or sacred experience where there's a sense of some kind of deep truth that we relate to. Now, for many people, this might be associated with the idea of a divinity or a deity, and then we would consider it to relate to religion. But there are also 25 to 30% of people in the West, for example, who would describe themselves as being spiritual but not religious. And they would tend to still believe that there's some maybe higher consciousness beyond our own minds. They might think of a soul dimension in life that way, something beyond our own mind and something beyond our own will that exists. And so in that situation, I would say people might relate to spirituality or the sacred in a more secular kind of way.
Well, that's an interesting one, and particularly the focus on the idea that something's transcendent as well, because I must admit, before discussing this with you this week and before really thinking about this, I wouldn't have necessarily considered myself to have much relationship with the metaphysical in that sense. But I suppose getting into this sort of stuff and talking about it with you, there's an element to which I think it's inherently metaphysical, particularly the transcendent aspect to it. So do you want to just speak to that a little bit in terms of how the transcendence maybe relates to something metaphysical or mystical?
Okay, well, and again, as an example of something which might be a spiritual perspective but not so much religious, is if the person says, the universe is telling me something, as opposed to, I got some sign from God, so to speak. Or people might use the expression, the universe provides, when they feel there's something provident about the nature of reality that might involve some kind of higher consciousness or order or pattern in life that has some, often people see as having some benevolent kind of quality. But you mentioned the notion mystical there, and I think that spiritual experience overlaps with mystical experience, which William James, a prominent American psychologist from early last century, who was also actually a very scientifically minded psychologist. He developed the first psychology laboratory, I believe. But he was very interested in mystical experience, which he described as having 4 qualities. It was ineffable, so hard to explain in words. It was noetic, so it would involve some kind of understanding that you couldn't just get from the intellect alone, like, say, precognition, for example. Where does that come from? Or clairvoyant visions that might prove to be true, this noetic quality. It's also transient, so mystical phenomena can't last for a great length of time. And it also shows passivity, as he called it, meaning being influenced by something beyond our own will. And again, it might be the idea of the universe gave me the sign, as opposed to, say, God giving me a sign, for example. But there's something beyond our own will.